Okay, so here we are back in Stata again, and now we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at how to get data files into Stata and manipulate data once it is in Stata. And the most important thing for you all for this week is really just to give yourself some time to play around with the software and familiarize yourself with it, because the more time that you can spend doing it early on before we actually have to do anything meaningful in the unit, before we're actually running any of our statistical tests, the more time you can spend now to play around with it and familiarize yourself with it, the easier you'll find it once we actually get to doing something a bit more substantial. So the first thing I want to show you is how we're going to be getting data into Stata for the rest of the unit. I showed you earlier how you can link in your Google Drive or OneDrive account and then open files that are stored in those cloud accounts in Stata using the file open process. Another functionality that Stata has, which is quite useful for us when we're teaching across lots of different sorts of things, different units and different data files that we need to use, is that Stata has the ability to be able to pull a data set that's hosted on a website somewhere within the Stata framework itself. So rather than actually having to have a saved copy of the data file yourself, I've uploaded a whole lot of data files onto a website, and anytime that you want to use them, you can do that using what's called a web use command. So the web use command gets Stata to pull a data file, use a data file from a certain website, and you tell it what the URL of the website is. And that means that you can get that data file, open it when you're currently using Stata, as long as you've got an internet connection, and then you can play around with the data file and save it locally if you want to, or not bother saving it. You can always access the original version of the data file from the website. So what we're going to do is, you can see we've got down the bottom here, we have our command box. And what we're going to do is to type in this particular command, which is the web use command, W-E-B-U-S-E, space, and then the word set, and the written out version of this is in your lecture slides for this week on slide 16. So web use set, and then I'm going to paste in a very long URL, which again is written into the PDF of your lecture slides. So I'm going to paste it in here rather than having to type it, because if I type it, I'm probably going to make a mistake. So I'm going to not use my keyboard shortcuts because it often doesn't work when we're using AppStream. So what I'm doing instead is just right-clicking down here and selecting paste, or you can go up to the edit menu and go paste that way. I've copied that twice. So web use set. And then this last thing is a URL. You guys don't need to know the details of this. It's just an online server which is hosting all of our data files. So web use set and then this command, and then I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard or return on your keyboard, and that's going to run this command. Okay, I didn't get any horrendous red messages here, which means there's no errors that have happened, which is a good thing. So what that did was to set a certain URL, which is the place that all the different data files are going to be called from. And now I'm going to run the second command, which is web use again, and then the name of the data file that I want to call up. So every week as we're going throughout this unit, you're going to have a different data file that we're going to be playing around with. They'll all have different names. The one that we're playing around with here is very inventively called week 3. So web use week 3.dta is the file extension for a Stata data file. You actually don't need to specify that, but I just like doing it for completeness' sake. So web use week 3.dta. And what's happened as a result of running that is that now we have these variables in the right-hand side. So what that means is that Stata has called up this data file using the magic of the internet, and we now have access to that data file in our current session of Stata. And if I click on either the data editor edit or the data editor browse window, either of those, what I'll open up is to have a look at what the actual data file looks like. And this looks just the same as what it was in one of the previous videos where we were walking through this. So if you guys do that yourself, if you go into Stata and you use the web use set and then paste in that very long URL and then web use week3.dta, you will hopefully see the same thing, the same data file here. Okay, so just to familiarize you a little bit, I know we spent a little bit of time before talking about this, but just to go over it again, this is our data editor here. This is essentially a very fancy spreadsheet. Every column is a variable and every row is an observation or a case. So here we have 6 people's data. and we have an ID number for each person, then we have their gender, and we have marks for PSYU1105 and 1104. On the right hand side here we have a list of our variables, and it's giving you information about the variable name, the variable label, the type of variable, the format, and any value labels if they're appropriate. And the value labels are only relevant for categorical variables, and the only categorical variable we have here is gender. And then down the bottom here we have a little bit more information about each of our variables, and you can see that as we kind of flip through here, the information down there changes a bit. Okay, so first thing I want to mention, at this stage that we're at now, is about this categorical variable gender. So remember, we just said before in the previous lecture bit that for categorical variables, you can't enter them, or you shouldn't enter them into your stats program using text, typing in the words male and typing in the words female. Instead, what you have to do is actually code the categories, assign each category a numeric marker, a numeric representation, and then you can tell Stata what the numbers correspond to, what categories or what kind of labels the numbers correspond to. And when I click on this first cell for gender here, if you have a look up the top here, you can actually see there's a 1 in this box there, and if I go down to male, you can see there's a 2, and if I go down to other, you see there's a 3. What that means is that the actual data in this data file isn't the word male, and isn't the word female, and isn't the word other. It's actually these numbers 1, 2, and 3. It's just that we've also assigned a label to each of these numbers, and it's the label that's being displayed here rather than the actual number. And the reason I know that, one of the reasons I know that, is because this is written in blue. So if you have a look at the actual text male, female, other here, it's written in blue, whereas all the other numeric data is written in black. Blue represents the fact that this is a categorical variable that has a value label, or a set of value labels assigned to it. So the fact that it's blue is an indication. The fact that when you click on your cell, you can see in this box up the top here, there's an actual number there, not the text letters being displayed, it's the actual number. And if you wanted to get Stata to actually show you in this display, rather than showing you the labels male and female and other, if you wanted to get it to show you the numbers, you can ask it to do that. So if you go into the tools menu and you go down to value labels, and you select hide all value labels, what that's going to change is the actual way that the data are displayed here. So you can see gender is now being represented by 1, 2, and 3, rather than the words male and female and other. So the labels that were being displayed before, it's just an aesthetic thing in that Stata's just showing you the actual text label rather than the core true data, the numeric data, which is what is actually in this spreadsheet. So take home message, any categorical variables that you want to use in your analyses, that you want to make summaries of, or that you want to actually do anything with in your program, they need to be actual numeric type data. It can't just be text string data being like letters and spaces and characters and all those kinds of things. It has to be numeric. So what you do for your categorical variables like gender, anything that's a categorical variable, you code your categories, assign each category a number, and you enter the numbers into these cells here rather than the actual text. But you can use the value labels feature to tell Stata what a 1 is, what a 2 is, what a 3 is. And that means that if you make a table or if you make a graph, that text label will be displayed in that output, which is much more helpful for us rather than the numbers. But the fact that the data are actually numbers, is truly numbers, that's an important thing for the analysis part of your statistical processing. So if you wanted to change that back again to display the numbers, which is what Stata does by default, you go into Tools, Value Labels, and you untick Hide All Value Labels. To show you a little bit more about these value labels, I'm going to go into the edit mode of my data editor. So you can see at the moment I'm in the browse mode, which means I can't actually edit anything. I'm restricted with some of the functionality in this window here. But if I click on this little icon in the top left-hand corner where I hover my mouse and it says edit mode, if I click on that, Stata's just warning me that I'm about to change from browsing to edit, which means that I could mess things up. It's just making sure that I know what I'm doing. So I say yes. What you can see now, if your eyes are as good as being able to see that all of this text here was grey before, whereas now it's black, which means that it's got some more functionality. And if you click on the variable gender in the variables list here, down the bottom here where it says value label gender, if you click on 3 little dots over to the right hand side, then that brings up this manage value labels window. And if I expand the little icon next to gender, this is telling me what my coding scheme is. So this is telling me that for this variable gender, it has this value labels coding scheme attached to it, where 1 represents female, 2 represents male, 3 represents other. If I had other categories, like if I had more than 3 categories I wanted to add in here, I could add a value, or I could edit the existing values, or I could remove values using this window in the middle here. But at the moment I'm not going to do anything, I just wanted to show you what that looked like. The next thing I want to show you is a very basic thing. It's just how to sort your data. So sorting your data doesn't do anything to change the actual meaning of the data itself. It just helps you to look at the data in a slightly different way by making either the smallest numbers up the top or the biggest numbers up the top, or in whatever sorting system that you want to imply. So what I'm going to do here is to go into my data window, go down to sort, and there's a couple of different ways you can sort. You can sort just in a standard method by just sorting in ascending order, or using advanced sort if you want to do a complicated version of different variables where you want to sort some by ascending order, some by descending order. We're going to stick with the standard sort. And in this variables drop down box here, this is a list of all the variables in your data file. So let's say we wanted to sort by PSYU1105. So if I click that and then I go OK, my data now you can see are in a different order. All the cases stay together in that, you know, what the scores for ID 1, person number 1 will stay the same. The scores for person number 2 will stay together, and they'll stay together in a row. They just sorted, the cases are just sorted in a different order. So now we have in ascending order, which means smallest to biggest, we have sorted by PSYU1105 scores. And what I want to show you now, if I close out of this data editor and I go back to our main window, what Stata has done is actually written this command down there, and this is the written out version, the written syntax version of what we just did through the menu system. So what we just did through the menu system was to sort our data file. Anytime you do things through the menu system, if you change your data in any way, if you produce anything in any way, Stata will actually write out in this main window what the written command equivalent is for what you just did through the menu system. And that's a really good way of learning the written syntax if this is something that you want to learn. So you can see sort is the command name. The very first word here is the command. It's the sort command. And then the name of the variable that we just sorted by. So if I wanted to sort my data in a different order now, so it's currently sorted according to PSYU1105. Let's say I wanted to sort it back so that it was in ascending order according to ID, so that ID number 1 was first, and then ID 2, and then ID 3, etc. I could do that through the menu system, but I'm going to show you how to do it just by using the command box down the bottom here. So if I type out sort, and then I type the variable name, which is ID. Now Stata is case sensitive, and what that means is that if your variable is written in lowercase, like this one is, ID, you have to use lowercase to represent the variable. If I typed ID in uppercase, then Stata would get confused, and I'll deliberately do that in a second to show you what happens. But first let me run this command, so sort, and then the variable name that I want to sort by, hit enter or return on your keyboard. And you can see on the left hand side here, this is a list of all the different commands that we've run in the kind of command history on the left hand side. And if I open up my editor again, you can see now my data are sorted again according to ID, so smallest to biggest ID. Let me show you now what happens if you make a mistake. So you already saw an example of an error message with this very alarming red thing that we got before, but let me show you in a little bit more detail what would happen if you make a mistake. So let's say I tried to sort according to gender, but I made a typo. So I put 2 E's there instead of 1. I did this accidentally, I didn't realize I was doing it, and then I hit enter. Stata would give me this message. So error messages are always written in red, and error messages are trying to help you in that they're trying to tell you what it is that's the problem. And after most error messages, you'll get this hyperlink, which is a numeric code that corresponds to the type of error that you got. So if you click on that hyperlink, the one that says R111, then this opens up a new window. This is a viewer window, which is giving you information from Stata's manual about what that error was. And the error that we received was that the variable gender was not found. And if you have a look up the top here, it's giving you a bit more information about this. It says that the variable does not exist. You may have mistyped the variable's name. So that's a good indication that you've made a mistake in trying to specify a variable. Most of the time it's because you've made a typo, because it's very, very easy to do those sorts of things. So if you receive that error message, you just need to go back and check what it is that you typed in the first place to correct the mistake that you made. Another good tip if you're trying to write out variable names is you can actually use the variable list on the right hand side to help you. So if I type the word sort, and then let's say I had a very complicated variable name and I was scared that I wasn't going to type it correctly, if I move my mouse over to the variable on the top right hand side here, and then I click the little down arrow just to the left of gender, what that's going to do is to move the variable name into my command box. So if I click that, then you can see the variable name exactly as it is written has been put into my command box there. So that's a good little tip for you.